He crossed borders in search of a better life. He left everything behind, family, friends, his homeland, and when all seemed lost, he found shelter in a sacred place. But that night, not even the walls of the church were enough. This is the story of Manuel, a man persecuted by the law, but protected by his faith. Manuel arrived in the United States fleeing brutal violence in Honduras. In his country, he had already lost 2 brothers to organized crime, and after receiving a direct threat, he decided to leave. He crossed borders, deserts, and uncertainties, carrying only a backpack, a rosary, and a crumpled photo of his children. Upon arrival, he tried to do everything right. He found work in construction, lived in a small room, and sent part of his salary to his family. For 8 years, he lived in the shadows of illegality, always afraid, but never giving up. Until one day, a neighbor was arrested by immigration after a surprise raid. He knew it was only a matter of time before they came knocking on his door too. With guidance from an immigrant support organization, he found shelter in a small Baptist church in Colorado. The law was unclear, but until then, churches were considered sanctuaries, places where federal agents rarely dared to enter out of respect for faith. He was welcomed by Pastor James, a soft-spoken man with an open heart who told him, "Here you are safe." In the early days, Manuel slept poorly, suspicious, listening to every sound as a possible sign of invasion. But over time, he began to help with church tasks. He swept the courtyard, helped in the kitchen, washed the windows. He became beloved by the community members, even though he couldn't leave through the front doors. Children called him Uncle Manuel, and some elderly people, who didn't know the whole story, thought he was just a new janitor. For 2 years, he lived in a makeshift room in the back of the temple, unable to leave, unable to see the sun directly, unable to hug his children. His world was the altar, the wooden benches, the stained glass windows. Sometimes he would look up at the sky through the skylight and wonder if he still had a future. The letters from his children were his source of strength. He read them every night, always with tears in his eyes. "Dad, I miss you. The teacher asked about you." On some Sundays, the church organized services with prayers for him. And even though he couldn't appear in public, he listened to everything from the back of the room, his heart aching and his hands clasped together. It was a voluntary exile. Outside the temple, there was the threat of deportation. Inside, there was longing, silence, and hope. But every day his faith grew. Volunteers brought meals, lawyers sought legal alternatives, and letters of support came from other churches and communities. Still, time was running out. At one point, a new interpretation of federal policy allowed agents to enter places of worship, provided they had specific orders. Few knew this. Manuel did not. Pastor James was suspicious, but he believed that pressure from the media and public opinion would still protect that sacred space. And then the night came. The night when everything would change. But until that moment, Manuel believed that his faith was his refuge. And that, even trapped within 4 walls, he was still free, because he had found a community that saw him as a human being, not a case number. That night, time seemed to pass more slowly. It was raining heavily, and the wind blew against the stained glass windows of the church, causing the glass to rattle slightly. Manuel was awake, as usual. He was a light sleeper. Sitting on his narrow bed, he read a letter from his youngest daughter written in colored pencil. "Daddy, I dreamed you took me to school again. I love you." He smiled sadly. He put the letter back in his Bible and closed his eyes. That's when he heard it. A subtle noise, tires braking on the wet sidewalk. He looked through the corner of the small attic window. Lights. 3 dark cars parked in front of the church. He knew. His heart raced. He quietly went down the stairs and ran to Pastor James's room. He knocked urgently on the door. Here. The pastor, still sleepy, put on his coat and ran with Manuel to the main hall. At 3:17 a.m., the church doors were knocked loudly. From outside, cold voices announced, "Immigration Department, we have a court order." The pastor tried to argue. He said that this man was a humanitarian refugee, that he was under spiritual care, that the walls of the church were sacred. But the agents already knew what to do. They had a signed order. The protocols had changed. One of them, in a mechanical voice, said, "We are not violating faith. We are enforcing the law." Manuel, motionless, his hands trembling, offered no resistance. He knew that fighting there would mean dragging everyone down with him. So he took a deep breath, picked up the Bible, put the photo of his children in his pocket, and walked away. One of the volunteers, awakened by the noise, tried to stop him. He cried, "He didn't hurt anyone. This isn't right." But the agents, their faces stone cold, escorted Manuel to the car. He looked back one last time. The golden cross on the altar still shone, illuminated by the dim light of the candles. Tears streamed down his face. In the front seat, Pastor James pressed his lips together, fighting back tears. As Manuel passed through the church door, he felt the cold air touch his face for the first time in months. It was the world outside, the world that now did not want him. He was placed in the back seat of the car. His hands were in his lap, his gaze fixed on the wet street. No words were spoken. Only the sound of the engine broke the silence. In the distance, a child was crying, perhaps from another house, perhaps only in Manuel's memory. Inside the church, volunteers gathered in silence. They lit a candle on the altar and sat in the pews, praying. That night, they say, the temple felt colder, emptier, sadder. Days later, the news spread. Local newspapers reported the arrest. NGOs protested. The community was divided. Some said that the law was the law. Others asked what kind of nation would arrest a man who was only seeking safety for his family. Manuel was deported. In Honduras, he was reunited with part of his family, but the country that had expelled him also took away part of his hope. The violence, unemployment, and threat that had made him flee were still there. He was now living in hiding again, but without a church, without friends, without sanctuary. Across the border, the Baptist church kept his room tidy. No one dared to occupy the space. The Bible was still there. His daughter's last letter lay on the table. Pastor James continued to pray for him every Sunday, and at each service there was a moment of silence, a heavy silence, full of unanswered questions. Because for many there, Manuel was not a number, an expired document, or an unwanted immigrant. He was a human being, a father, a man of faith, and even after everything, his presence still lingered in that place, like a whisper, like a longing. And so Manuel's story did not end with his deportation. It continued in the hearts of those who believe that compassion is worth more than borders, that laws can change, but humanity should not be lost, because the true church is not just walls. It is people, and those people who welcomed him will never forget the day when faith was taken out the front door, handcuffed, but with its head held high. Today, the room where Manuel slept remains empty. The silent walls still echo with the prayers he said every night on his knees. The mattress was left exactly as he left it, his clothes folded, his family photo next to the bed, his rosary hanging on the headboard. Nothing was removed. Pastor James says that space has become a silent memorial, not of death but of interrupted faith. Sometimes at night he stops by and lights a candle. He stands there in silence for a few minutes, and he prays, not for justice, but for memory, because he knows that somewhere in the world, Manuel is still alive. Afraid, but alive. Longing, but standing. With hope Even after everything, the churchgoers wrote letters. They sent them to newspapers, to Congress, to immigration. A group of young people painted a mural on the side of the temple, Manuel's face surrounded by doves and stained glass. And below, a simple phrase, "No human being is illegal." Tourists take pictures. Children ask questions. The mural has become a symbol of something greater, of the resistance, of compassion. It is no longer just the story of one man. It is the story of many, of families separated, of children orphaned by living parents, of communities that welcome those whom the system rejects. And above all, it is the story of how faith can endure even when everything falls apart. Some say he regrets going to church, that maybe if he had run away, he would still be here. But those who knew him know, Manuel was never a fugitive. He chose not to run. He chose to believe. He chose to trust that human kindness still existed. And even in handcuffs, he left the church with his head held high, with the dignity that many lost trying to hide. He was taken away by force, yes, but his courage remained. And it took deep root in that place. If you think this is just another story about deportation, think again. This is a story about choices, about the price of faith, about what we are willing to sacrifice for what we believe in. And above all, it is a story about us, about how we treat each other, about how much we are willing to remain silent in the face of injustice or to raise our voices even if it hurts. Because as long as there is someone in need of shelter, as long as there is a door that closes and a soul that knocks desperately, as long as there is silence, where there should be compassion, Manuel's story will not be over. It will continue in every church, at every border, on every wall painted with hope. And maybe if we listen carefully, we will hear the echo of his last prayer, said before he was taken away. "Lord, if I can't stay, at least don't forget me."